Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our third session in this room. Our topic today is Eastern Centering Diversity, Equity and Inclusion in Community Strategy, a case study from the Online Learning Consortium. And this session is being recorded for our colleagues who could not join us in real time. We are using automated Zoom captions during this live event. We will edit the recording transcripts before we share them with you to be more accurate. And at the bottom of the Zoom window, you will see a closed caption button. You will see the live transcript text underneath that button. You can select turn them on or off as you prefer. Please pose any questions or ideas using the chat function that I will be moderating today. And towards the end of this session, we will share and go over some questions and answers for our panelists. We will also give you more information of how to contact us through our our online Peralta equity team. So now I'd like to hand the microphone over to our presenters. We have Angela, Gunder, and team. Welcome, and please start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to attempt to share screen here. So for just a second, you're going to see. Let's hope that this works well and not the wrong screen. Okay, are we looking at the right screen? Can you see?
Yes, yes,
slides?
we can see it.
Awesome. I love it when the technology works the way I hope it does. So thank you so much. My name is Patsy Moskal, and I'm actually from the University of Central Florida in Orlando, but today I'm honored to be here as the Vice President of the Online Learning Consortium Board of Directors. And I'm with my colleagues, Kate Jordahl and Kim Long, who are also on the Board of Directors, and our dear friends and colleagues who hold the OLC together, Angela, Gunder, and Maddie Shellgren, who are on the staff. So we're here today. We feel strongly that OLC has a history of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, but this is an ongoing work in progress, and it's never completed, but only improved. So we're going to share with you today our current process at looking at our DEI and how we approach that from an organization. So hopefully it will help some others. To begin with, though, I think we probably should give you some background on the OLC. You see if my slides are now moving slowly. I'm not advancing. Up there, I'm advancing slowly. So if you're not familiar, now I'm advancing too, see, that's double click. If you're not familiar with the OLC, the Online Learning Consortium is a collaborative community of higher education leaders and innovators dedicated to advancing quality online, blended, and digital teaching and learning experiences. We actually began in 1999 as the Sloan Consortium, for those of you who go back that far. Some of us do. And since then, we've become one of the leading professional learning associations internationally, with a focus on building community through professional development, events, research, strategic partnership, consulting, and community engagement. With educators of all roles and experience levels as part of our community, we support community members in the journey towards what we hope is quality. And I'd encourage you, if you want to know more, to follow that link to our website to find out about the organization. So Kate and Kim, I'm going to lead off with you. We started with a task force, but actually a little bit before then. Can you share a little bit about how we progressed in our journey?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'm Kate Jordahl. Kim's computer went down, so we're texting in the background trying to get her back on, but I will give a start anyway. So I am a professor in the Fine Arts Division at Foothill College, teaching photography, design, and art. And I am also a board member of the Online Learning Consortium, which is just an incredible project that I love doing and working on. And so as I was working with the external affairs and we started talking about this idea of meeting the moment and both analyzing what we're doing right and what we can do better, knowing that there's always room for improvement. And so we started out as a subcommittee of external affairs, but then realized that this was really something that the whole board needed to take on. And so we were charged by the president of the board, Mary Nimick at that time, to make a task force. And we really looked both at the organization, at who we serve, and all of the different members that we have and how we could address this issue in this moment. And so I take this on. Why a task force? Why am I here? Is I just feel this is everybody's work. And I'm so passionate about all of us stepping up from where we stand, from where we work, from whatever position we're in, to try and make the difference and ask the question. And it ties in, if some of you watched the last one about mindfulness, this idea that we help from where we are at the moment, not the big picture. We can't fix everything, but what can we fix in our own small level that hopefully can build to something bigger? And I think the questions the task force asked were really central to that concept. I don't think we have Kim back yet, but so maybe I think that if anyone else had anything else to say on the idea of why a task force.
I can add a little bit to that too, Kate, and really pleased to be with you all. Angela Gunder, I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the OLC, and a lot of the conversations that we were having as an organization over time, really related to our mission, which is access to education. And with the onset of the pandemic, with the rise in social injustice and really our awareness of the deep inequities and the endemic inequities that have existed across our field and across the nation and across the globe, a lot of our early conversations that led up to the forming of the task force were really about eschewing a lot of the conversations and the narratives that we had heard that were really related to DEI as a checklist, or diversity, equity, and inclusion as something that we needed to sort of fix within a moment, as opposed to what, and I can think back to many chats that Kate and I had specifically about guiding the organization, guiding our community members, and really guiding all of us as colleagues more broadly into committing to an ongoing process in practice of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not feeling like there would be a moment of perfection or completion that we would ever meet. And it's really challenging in this moment in time when, we're often in pretty dark places where we're challenged by how far we need to go, especially in direct contact to the students that we're serving and seeing the challenges that they're facing. But we knew that we needed to bring together members of the community and have conversations in different ways about how we would attend to the foundational architecture as well as the sustainability of our efforts. And Maddie and I will both talk about this in a second, but do so in a way that align to our unique values and our mission, and know that that work would be evolving and changing over time, but we would always be coming back to our articulated values as our touchstone, and as the way that we would really center our work. So just wanted to add that too.
Yeah, and I'm sharing on the screen now. You can see, just to reinforce that this was really a community project. We had 3 subcommittees of our task force that we're going to talk a little bit more about. Angela and Maddie will share some more details in just a second. But infrastructure. So it was really looking at the different aspects of the organization and trying to get experts from the field who were strongly engaged and had buy-in and I'm still waiting for my slide to advance, which is going very slowly.
Patsy,
So
I'll
programs,
add that Kim is back on the call now too. If
yeah,
after you introduce all the members of the task force on these slides, we can definitely go back to her to answer that first question.
yeah, definitely. And you know, so the three subcommittees involved infrastructure, community engagement, and programs and services. So we really tried to target each of them strategically and have experts. You can see the number of folks involved here. So, you know, we talked a bit about how we got to this point. How is the task force itself formed? And I will punt this to, you know, I think Angela or Maddie, do you have something to share? Or maybe Kim?
I can start, but yeah, maybe I'll yield the floor to, you know, Kim, maybe you could share a little bit about some of the early conversations that you were instrumental in leading within the OLC, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion before a task force was even discussed or talked about.
Okay. Good afternoon, and I'm so sorry. I think it might be good morning in California. I'm on the East Coast, but we've had so many discussions over the years and formed several committees. I was involved on the onset of the HBCU initiative primarily, but there were other groups, equity groups in OLC. And so the task force was an effort after many conversations to be more comprehensive and to pull together all of our community that had an interest in the various areas in making sure our community was equitable for everyone. And so that was the genesis of the effort. I don't know, Angela, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I can kind of expand from there. So Patsy introduced the three subcommittees that were created. We were actually inspired by a task force that had been convened by the board in, I believe it was in 2020, that was on blended learning and looking at blended education as really the future of our universities in terms of providing access and really looking at the infrastructure of access to education. So we wanted to take a systematic approach to how we discussed both the challenges and the opportunities that were in front of us. And as I mentioned in my comments earlier, we were really looking at aligning our strategy for the task force and ultimately creating recommendations that would go to the full board through a value-centered approach. So we wanted to collect members of our community that really represented the different dimensions of diversity, including the dimension of diversity of thought and perspective, as well as dimensions of ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, ability. We were trying to take a comprehensive look at that and also looking at roles and how power and privilege affected each of us in different ways within our role as educators. And we spent a lot of time looking at what our own personal values were, what our own community espoused. And one of the biggest things that came out of those conversations was that we were looking for ways in which we could apply criticality to our practices within the field, but always using that criticality to lead towards generative action, that we were not looking to just dismantle and burn down and take things apart, but we were always looking for that answer of what would happen next in terms of how we will rebuild and how we will sustain that work once we've rebuilt those foundations. So this entire presentation, we really want to be open and transparent about our process, because we hope that there might might be some learnings that you might glean in terms of how you can organize and assemble folks within your communities, however you define them, to do some of this work in this way, given that it was really productive for us. But we ended up really leaning into a modified SOAR analysis, so looking at strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. We had series of meetings where we both met in Zoom, as well as meeting asynchronously and collaborating within Google Docs, because people are so incredibly busy right now, even though they're very dedicated to the work. And we used worksheets that we had created to ideate challenges and opportunities for the organization around these 3 buckets of infrastructure, programs and services, and community engagement. And then we moved all of those opportunities that were created into concrete recommendations that were presented to the board for feedback, as well as collecting feedback over a couple of different rounds with the committee itself until we were able to generate an internal report. We spent a lot of time, trying to poke holes in our thinking, trying to think about extensions of work that we were currently doing that we knew we wanted to continue. And then ultimately, we undertook the challenge of prioritizing those recommendations as well, so that we knew that we could work on things that were actionable in the moment, but also build towards other bigger initiatives that we wanted to take on, but knew that we didn't have the place and the space to immediately implement them right away. I'm going to turn the mic over now to talk a little bit more about this values work. I'm going to turn the mic over to Maddie Shellgren, who is our Director of Community Engagement within the OLC.
Hi all, yeah, happy to be here with you all. I think that as we sort of thought about our story and the work we did and what is relevant, one of the things that has always come to mind as important for this space and with folks that might be interested in doing this kind of work is, so Angela talked about how we wanted this to be oriented around our values, and we've been doing some work internally, of course, to that end of establishing, identifying, articulating our values. I think it's one thing to say that we care about certain things. It's another thing to actually identify those, to get those ratified, to have those be community driven in and of themselves. And that is also work that the OLC has been doing over the last year and a half, is identifying those. But I think, interestingly, and this is a story, and Kevin Kelly himself was actually a part, you might have seen his name, he was part of this task force, but he was in this space as well, so he can't recall it. But I think a really significant story in my mind, as I think through the work that we all did, was actually one of the very first meetings that we had. And I'll say it because it was one of the things I had asked, but I was very curious about the people who were on this task force of how are we situating ourselves in this work? Why are we doing this work? Why did we say yes to this work? Why were we at the table metaphorically, or we were all meeting virtually, right? But metaphorical table, why were we there? Because I think that a lot of us engage with, and in my own history, I've engaged with, and I will be the first to even say oh yeah, I had this great opportunity. It'll be a great CV line. That is not why I should get into DEI work, right? It shouldn't be for those sorts of things. Those are important. Absolutely. There are certain values and incentives within our various working spaces that are important, and we do need to tend to. But if I'm not there to do the work and truly commit to it in an equitable way with other folks around that table as well, then I need to really critically think about that as well. The labor I'm willing to put into this work, because it is labor, and labor of different sorts, right? That we found, and I found that not just the time, but the emotional labor that goes into it was so important and telling. So I share this in sort of as a means for reflection for all of us in the room, but to take a moment with the team as well as just identifying, having that space to share commitments. And I know that was really important to me as we went around the room and each of us sort of said who are we and why are we here? That was actually quite important to me. To hear why other folks were at that table and what we each, our own values, not just our organizational values, but our own values that we brought to this work as well. So I think in just sort of situating that larger ecosystem, that I can't understate how important that was to hear the commitments in the room and not just assume the commitments in the room. And Patsy, I saw you on mute.
Yeah, I think that's great, Maddie and Angela. That's great context. And I will just say, I think everybody on all three subcommittees was there because they had a strong belief in the mission of this task force. And Angela, you mentioned having opportunities, both synchronous meetings over Zoom and also asynchronous via Google Docs. I think that was also important. This was a multi-year process, right? I mean, this began in 2020, I believe, maybe even the fall of 2019, the initial, what are we going to do before we actually had a task force. And so the findings and recommendations were just now this spring presented to the board of directors. And we just want to give you a high level, look at what did we come up with, given our three subcommittees. And I'm going to punt, let's see, the infrastructure. I think that's you, Angela, is that right?
Yep. As I mentioned before, this was an internal report that we compiled for the organization, but we really felt that it was important and actually went to the board to ask for permission to share the recommendations and the findings that came out as part of this conversation that we're having today. And we're now talking about what it might be like for us to create an external resource that was inspired by the work that we did internally, not only the findings, but the process that we used to get to the findings. But in terms of the overarching findings from infrastructure specifically, we created a series of leading actions that we knew would be necessary in order to look at our sustainability as an organization around these efforts. So, we felt that it started by articulating statements of intent for the organization that were voiced by the community and staff that we could use in any and all initiatives that we conducted, and that we would really look at the pathways into the organization, the ways that people learn about the OLC, engage with the OLC in terms of the inclusivity of those pathways, and making sure that we had clear ways for folks from diverse communities to be involved in the work, and really trouble the notion that we might be excluding certain folks, and really address and shift and turn that tide. We also looked a lot at the current partnerships that we have, and really determining ways in which we might be an aid and a support to different communities. A lot of the conversations right now have to do with representation and where we're failing, but we also have conversations that are really troublesome, where folks are saying, hey, well-resourced institutions need to ride in and help minority serving institutions figure out their problems. And a lot of the work that Kim and I do is around shifting that narrative and looking at the ways that HBCUs, that tribal colleges and universities can actually lead the way to directing us in what we need to learn collectively as a field around what it means to build cultures of inclusivity and building community within and across socioculturally situated environments within institutions. So that was really compelling to know that we had the community voicing that sort of shift and that turn that we need to see within the larger community. We talked about designing more spaces and practices for people to authentically share their findings, their challenges and their actions, and build spaces that were conducive towards folks being able to be candid about what was working and what wasn't, and doing so within very respectful discourse, but again, applying that criticality, as well as creating space for us to be advocates for each other, particularly around addressing issues of DEI, making sure that we were all truly living within our beliefs of fighting racism and being an organization that is truly anti-racist through our actions and not just through words. And then last but not least, looking at the ways in which we could make sure that we were attending to this work over time. So actually creating an advisory council comprised of community members to continue to shape and guide this work. And that was probably the most important recommendation that came from infrastructure was how can we continue to assemble and move this forward, knowing that we'll never be done with this work. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about the findings from programs and services.
Some of the findings we found is when we have to break up into groups, we have these conversations, we come back together, and we found out that we often came up with some of the same ideas. I mean, that it is a natural over thing between programs and services and infrastructure. But that group had some very incredible, authentic conversations looking at how we could do things. And I'll just say to this group in this room, many of your colleges may be OLC members and you might not even know. And so how can we reach not just the people who for our organization, but reach everybody who could take advantage of these incredible services that we are offering and the work that we're trying to do. We talked about the journal and how we could make the journal more, have more work in this area, because we do have the OLC journal, which is a very incredible place for research. And how can we focus or call out, because there's work there on diversity, but it may get kind of blended in and not be available to people who are doing the research. So many little pieces that we were trying to identify of how we could make actionable more of the things we were doing, and then focus what we're doing in a more clearly diverse and inclusive way. And echoing what everyone's saying, the importance of having a range of voices in the room. I'm definitely interested as a community college advocate that we had a whole range of educational institutions and community organizations that came together with their different perspectives on how our community could work together to forward diversity. And then we hope amplify that across our larger educational community. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kim, who worked with community engagement.
Yeah, and Maddie is going to kick us off with the findings, the formal findings, and then Kim's going to add her take on supporting that third area of the subcommittee.
Absolutely, and I know that we would routinely come back around to this, but as I shared these, one of the things to keep in mind and just to reinforce is that across the board, each of these subcommittees were consistently in alignment with one another, right? That was not only the great lines think alike, but it was difficult to think of one subcommittee action or strategic priority without thinking of the impact and the influence and the necessary connection with the other. So for community engagement, there were three major priorities that that subcommittee resulted in. And that was one, to assess existing programming related to DEI for community engagement opportunities. So what are we doing, right? Let's actually look at everything we're doing related to DEI within community engagement opportunities. The second was engage in targeted outreach for specific priority groups. So both Angela and Kate have both mentioned this in various ways, right? But who is our community? Actually sitting with that and recognizing that that's not a trivial question for an organization with like the OLC that does represent and have multiple touch points with a lot of different types of communities. So who are our community groups and what do each of those community groups need? What are their challenges? What are their desires? What are they looking for? So actually engaging in some really specific and intentional outreach and dialogue with each of those groups. And then the third was explore the development of a DEI community of practice or host community space or platform to cultivate community, support and connect members and engage volunteers. So we have a fantastic ecosystem of a lot of folks committed to this. What does it look like and contributing to this already, right? What does it look like to continue to sustain that community space? And that ties directly to what Angela mentioned as well. So I'll drop all three of those in the chat, but Kim, over to you to continue to expand.
Oh, yes. And I think I want to still go back to the formation of our group for community engagement, because it was important to have people who were outside of the OLC community participate in helping us look at our messaging out to the world, because OLC has its own community, but it also speaks to people that are in other diverse fields outside of education. So we had those people come in who were DEI experts and marketing and PR, and could look at us with fresh eyes to examine what we had done in the past and to recommend ways that we could be stronger and better in our messaging to our community and to the world. And so I think that was very important for us as community engagement. And we had someone on who was a part of the national accreditation for diversity and equity, and to look at standardizing ways that we could promote diversity, equity, and inclusion from within, from within our organization, starting at the board level and moving out into our committees and our programs and everything that we touch and do, because that is community engagement and making sure that people felt welcomed, embraced, included, invited, all the things that are actionable, but that make a difference rather than just having a written message. So when we looked at our group, the recommendations were all in those areas.
So moving forward, we actually are trying to figure out, all right, how can we help you, use this? And I'm going to invite Angela, can you pop the Padlet? So how do others use this process at their own institution? And we want to kind of start a conversation and try to get you to think, first of all, what are you or your institution currently doing to advance DEI at any level or scope?
So two things. One, and thank you to Maddie who whipped this up right before this presentation. But we wanted to share with you a handout that she made that actually gives a summary of the process that we used within the task force. So that's this first link that I'm putting in the chat. Please feel free to use this within your contexts, remix it, share it out. Talk to us about it too. After this presentation, we'll give you our contact information if you want to learn more about any of the intricacies of the logistics of it. I would also say reach out to Kevin Kelly as well, because he was a part of this and can talk about what that experience was like. But the second piece, and this is modeling some of the format and flavor of our interactions, was that we spent a lot of time sharing where we were at on our own journeys as institutions, as individual educators, in terms of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within strategy. And we want this to be a dialogue within this group too. So we're really appreciative of our friends who put together this conference, that they also created a Padlet for the discussion. So we have sneakily gone on to the Padlet and have put in two questions for you. The first is the one that Patsy has asked already and has up on the screen of, what are you or your institution currently doing to advance DEI at any level or scope? And I see several of you, oh, my buddy Reed Dixon jumped on here too. Go ahead and you can leave a comment and answer under that first question. Also, if you have something that doesn't fit within the box of these two questions that we have up here within this space, which are actually reversed, we're hoping answer question 2 first and then answer question 1 second, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. But if you have an insight or a finding or something that sort of does not fit within the box of these two things, break out of that mold. You can click on the pink plus sign on the bottom right-hand corner of Padlet and add another thought or an extension. Maybe you have a link to a resource that has been particularly compelling to you, but go ahead and add to this Padlet, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to do so. Thank you, Maddie, for updating the question numbers on that one as well. If you want a little bit of inspiration, like some of the different ideas that are being posted within this space, and then certainly share yours.
I will say, because I think the document that Maddie has shared about the process and the fact that we need to learn from each other. So a piece which hasn't been mentioned is that the online OLC is doing some work in another task force on blended learning and on that work. And we very much look to the process for that work to help build a different but authentic process for DEI. And that therefore, when we work together, we can build on each other's successes rather than thinking that we have to start from scratch. And that's one of the reasons why we want to share this work, is because we really feel that we're all kind of trying to find a way to not just make shelf documents, to make things that actually live in our institutions, make things that are actually at the ground level and help students succeed, help students thrive, and help faculty also thrive in these spaces so that they can continue to serve our students.
Yeah, and hopefully we're giving everyone a little bit of time here to respond to the, what you're currently doing, what you're hopeful that you're going to do. But I just want to come back to, I think Kim's point was really critical. And there were a couple of comments that I believe Angela made in the chat about the importance of having folks outside of our normal group involved in this process, because we get so siloed into our way of thinking if all we ever include are people like us who are always around us and who already know how we are. I think we can kind of miss out on those voices, and we miss out on opportunities to try to improve and reach others, as a function of this process itself.
And that brings up an interesting thing too, that how many of us are on leadership things at our institutions, and we always see the same, we hope more than 12, but maybe 15 people that do that work. And how do we bring in more people and more voices? Kim, I think, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think as a community of educators, the ultimate goal is student success. And I always bring everything backwards from that. Why are we here? What is the reason? What is our why? And if we look at student success, then we need to have those voices in as well. And there are wonderful ways to move through a community such as this with that intent. And I think it's important for us to forget ourselves and leave egos at the door as professionals to get to that ultimate goal of how do we help all students succeed, no matter what backgrounds they come from. Let's not have any barriers, socioeconomic, any, of those indicators, how to override any situations that students arrive with in especially the online learning, online and blended environments. And so that's why it's important for a leadership group such as OLC to start out practicing all of the diversities and embracing that. And that was our initial, that's the most compelling reason that an organization such as OLC could have, is to promote to others that OLC as a community is leading the ultimate goal of student success.
Kim, I'm really happy that you said that. I was looking through the Padlet comments on, what are you or your institution currently doing to advance DEI at any level and scope? And I was really touched by the one comment that's on here about my institution is, very, very much at the beginning of this work. My institution is avoiding structural change. It has not gotten representation.
I saw that. Yes.
And I was going to call this group to provide some exemplars, of how they started those conversations. But you really answered it, Kim. For many of us, it comes down to the fact that we need to find common ground, and we really need to make sure that in doing so we're looking at what our outcome needs to be, and it's taking care of our students. And certainly in this moment in time with the pandemic, we've learned how little we know about student access. We have learned how little we know about the the extent of access to bandwidth, and how there are many students that can't even get into the classrooms that we're building for them within digital learning environments. So really, again, centering this work on who we're here to serve is a critical first step, and one that has the ability to change hearts and change minds, which is really the space that we're in at this moment.
And I think that's
sorry,
a
go ahead,
great lead
Patsy.
in, Maddie. Or you want to share more on the what next part?
Sure, I absolutely can. I'll just briefly say too, is that just as a follow-up to that point, and for whether it's folks just getting started or folks that who have been themselves engaging with DEI for a while, or their institutional context, is that remembering that this work, even that term can be problematic, right? What is this work? What does this work look like? There is no monolith for diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It doesn't look one way, and it doesn't look the same anywhere. Necessarily, it can't, right? If we truly are being responsive to unique community needs. And nevertheless, right, these spaces and these conversations, we can learn from each other, as Kate and others have said, and learn from, like, how do we approach those conversations? What models and theories of dialogue do we have? What actual disciplines can we learn from to help advance this work? I take a lot from rhetoric, a lot from storytelling, a lot from the disciplines I've been inspired by and grown through. But I know along my own journey too, is that there are along the way different pressures of, like, this work has to look this way, or if you're not doing this in this way, then you're somehow failing. And that can in and of itself be an interesting barrier that we necessarily need to look at and question, and part of that system that might not be as productive, but in some ways as it also is likewise productive in others. So if you are in that spot where you're just not sure where to start, where it might be overwhelming, right, that we're here as well, and our story, if nothing else, hopefully will be one in which it has to be a systematic approach, and that that it can happen, right? And that takes time. And 3 years might seem like a long time, but time is, I think, also really important in this work. So yes, in terms of next steps, because we only have 3 minutes, and I don't want our fantastic room managers, Emma, and the rest of the Peralta team to worry about us getting close to time. So I will at least say this, and then we can follow up with any others. But yes, so we extend an invitation to you all from the Online Learning Consortium. We've learned a lot through this process and through our community, and of course, invite you into that space with us. Because as you've heard, we have a lot of priorities and a lot of strategic actions that we are about to embark on and currently are doing so. So if you're interested in this work and our advisory councils, any of those spaces, please let us know, get in contact with us. Likewise, please feel free attending any of our upcoming events. We'll continue to story this work, and it will be fun, I think. And if I were a participant, I might say, like, okay, cool. Like, the OLC's just told me that they're going to do some things. Like, let's follow up. Let's see what they're doing in the next 3 years. I think that follow through for community is also really important, that we're not just saying what we're saying we're going to do. We're going to do what we said we're going to do. So come join us in those spaces. We, as I mentioned very briefly, we have a fantastic group of volunteers. And so if you're interested in helping to drive forward the work, for instance, there are a number that are actually diversity, equity, inclusion anchored specifically. For instance, our co-chairs for DEI at our conferences and other sorted roles. So if you have any interest in volunteering and getting involved in an organization like the OLC, reach out as well, because we have lots of opportunity there. Continue to add to this Padlet and other working spaces. We would love to know what you're doing. We love amplifying diversity, equity, and inclusion work happening around the field of online blended digital flexible learning. And related to that, Angela did just drop a link in the chat, but a form of amplification is also through scholarship, it's through funding, it's through continued support. So if you are doing work that you want to celebrate, want to let folks know about, want to amplify, please feel free and encouraged to consider applying not only for our scholarships for the OLC's diversity, equity, and inclusion related awards and our other awards. Help us meet the goal of continuing to amplify and spotlight quality of online blended and digital learning by entering into those spaces or nominating others who are doing fantastic work. Angela, I'm not sure if you want to say anything else in that regard, but that is a huge one, because it's, often we have these great resources, but not everyone knows about them. But this is a fantastic resource both for our awards and our scholarship. And Kate, I see your hand.
I'm going to jump in because, one of Some of you know I worked for a long time with the CVC, the California Virtual Campus, and one of our taglines was put on your own oxygen mask first, meaning you have to care for yourself. And one of the greatest cares for myself under this really challenging few years has been working with the other people that you see in these windows and doing this conversation and work. And one of the ways we heal ourselves so that we can continue to give to our fellow faculty, to our colleagues, to our students is really doing this authentic work and supporting each other. And the OLC has just been a real key for me in that piece of being able to work with Kim and Maddie and Patsy and Angela and all the people you see on the other slides that have added to my life. So thank you, all of you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you everyone in this room.
Thanks, Kate. Mhm.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
Thank you so much. A big Zoom round of
Thanks.
applause. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for your time.